At the same time, it focuses on the entire ecosystem, which is about engaging the business sector as well. So it's not just one way or unidirectional flow of services from government to the citizens, but it's also about engaging the business sector. But this is not enough. So these strategies are not enough. And this is primarily identified in a research paper published by the King's College London, where they say that the governments of different creeds are struggling and frequently failing to meet the expectations of citizens. So the key word here is expectations, as evidenced by a lack of confidence in government institutions and events in recent political history. So a solution is that a new thinking is needed to address changes in technology, media, and public expectations. So how can we achieve that new thinking? By new thinking, we mean the engagement of citizens as well as the utilization of various emerging technologies or the digital technologies in particular. And to address that challenge of engaging citizens and utilization of emerging technologies, here is a recent publication coming from G20 Summit, which happened a few days ago in India. And it's about the development of digital public infrastructure. So again, you can see that there is a stack of various elements which are just not technical, but are also about engagement and collaboration or legal aspects plus policy frameworks and so on. So with this, I want to highlight the point that the governments are making efforts, not just at individual national level governments, but also at an international level to make a collaborative and engaging effort of involving citizens as well as various other entities who are stakeholders in this entire value chain of public services. But again, this G20 DPI is also not enough. So next slide, please. Again, going back to the research paper published by the King's College London, the challenge is that technology is often the easy part. The humans, business processes, and institutions are the hardest part. And yesterday we had a good number of presentations on cybersecurity. And one thing which is commonly discussed in the cybersecurity domain is about the people, process, and technology. And within that, it's said that the humans are the weakest link. So that is again something which is going to affect the utilization of emerging tech for delivery of public services or building trust, as well as in addressing the challenges which people may have from a socio-cultural perspective. So what do we mean by trust? Are we talking about digital trust? Are we talking about the human trust? Are we talking about both? Because in general, when we talk about trust and technologies together, the perception is that we are talking about the digital trust. But it's not something enough for people to encourage them to engage with the government or the utilization of digital public services. So let us look at what we mean by trust. Again, there is a lack of consensus on the definition of trust. And yesterday we had a good number of presentations where people talked about lack of definitions or of specific technologies or specific words which are applicable to this domain. So one of these elements is trust. But I found one definition which I think is more relevant to today's presentation and this entire workshop. It's about a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based upon positive expectations of the intentions or behavior of another. So if I give you an example, let's go back to a couple of centuries ago, when a society was closely knit. People were living in villages and everybody knew everybody else in the village. So if somebody had to borrow some money from someone, it was based on the reputation of borrower and the belief of a lender that the borrower will return the money. So it was a completely accountability based and reputation based trust society. But then came the institutionalization of trust through banks or insurance or other legal contracts. And this way, we kind of lost some trust in banks, especially during the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008. But still, people have a strong confidence or trust in services of banks plus some other organizations, because it is believed that their business or how they make money is known, at least to the extent where a common citizen is involved. So, but now we are moving to the state of digital trust. Next slide, please. Where we are concerned about the trust in digital technologies. But before that, let's have a look at if we can quantify the trust, because trust is something which comes from the psychological perspective, economic perspective, philosophical perspective, and so on. So here is a book published by David H. Meister and others titled The Trusted Advisor. And they make an attempt to quantify the trust. And the four variables are credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. So trustworthiness can be calculated as a function of credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. Credibility refers to your reputation in a way, and or the other person, the opposite party, how they see your competence. Then there comes the factor of reliability. Again, it's somewhat dependent upon the competence, but at the same time, it is about the assurance that you are able to deliver the task. And third one is intimacy, which is more about the people aspect or the emotional aspect, which talks about the emotional element. Or if you take the example of, let's say, Facebook. So intimacy refers to the number of likes you see. You get an idea or a perception that this particular thing is more likable or interesting or somewhat like that. And last element is self-orientation, which is about the safety and security element. So lower the value of S, higher the value of trustworthiness. But now if we map this to the government public services or the digital public services, can governments offer everything? The credibility, the reliability, or intimacy? Because most of the projects which governments undertake regarding the digitalization or digital transformation are suffering from issues like budget overrun or lack of competency and things like that. So point is that the governments cannot address all these four variables, but what they can do is to offer a culture or an environment of providing most of these elements or to the best of their environment, these elements, so that the other stakeholders can work towards the increasing the trustworthiness. So next, previous slide, please. Yeah. So now looking at the digital trust aspect, and here you see it's not just the gadgets, but there are people as well. So we are not talking about machines only or mobile phones or tablets or computers, but we are also talking about humans. And the trust here is a bidirectional flow of information or belief or perception, depending upon how you see it. So users need to trust the technologies. At the same time, technologies should be trustworthy enough to provide enhanced trust to the users. We'll see that in the following slides. Next slide, please. So a difference or a distinction between human trust and digital trust can be made on one point, which is digital trust relies on competence as well as intent. And intent here is important because in yesterday's session, we discussed a lot about the data management or data protection aspects. And human trust is generally understanding of what a person's motivations are and believing they have got your back. So it's about humans or the citizens trusting the government, as well as digital trust is about the government's offering a technology solution to offer enhanced trust to the citizens. Now, going back to what mathematician Clive Humby said a few years ago, that data is the new oil. And that is because the digital economy is running on the fuel of data. But can data be used in a way it's generated or stored, or it needs some kind of analytics? Well, obviously it needs that, because like oil needs to be changed to gas or plastics or chemicals, etc. Similarly, data needs to be analyzed or it needs to be transformed into meaningful insights to be used by any organization. So there is a unique characteristic of data which should be managed to differently to preserve the trust, because it's not just a physical commodity, it's an intangible asset with tangible benefits or challenges. Next slide, please. Now, going back to one of the examples or case which was discussed in yesterday's presentation, it was about the storage of a large number of data about the COVID-19 vaccinations. So we all saw that governments across the globe, they stored a good number of a large database of those who were vaccinated and associated details. So ideally, that should have been destroyed after a point of time. But some governments decided to keep it in order to run analytics. Now, the challenge is that this data lake is like the name says, it's a data lake. So it's exposed to a higher level of risk in terms of data breach, as well as the misuse by any adversary. So what is the solution? A potential solution to this kind of problem where data lakes are existing is to go back to the solution, which is a very fundamental solution in the financial sector. It's related to the use of credit cards. So when you go on online shopping, you use a card, say you should buy Visa or MasterCard, you provide your card details, and then the merchant executes the transaction by connecting it to the bank through which your card is linked. So the merchant is unaware of what your bank is, which banking service organization you are using, or how much balance you have in your account. They just get a response as a yes or no for the execution of your transaction. At the same time, the intermediary, which is Visa or MasterCard, they know about your bank. They know which bank has issued this card. But again, they do not know the specific details of how much balance you have on one side. At the same time, on the other side, in most cases, they do not know about the value of transaction. In most cases, it's not the case with every transaction. So point is to divide that data lake into several data silos, you can say. So divide that data into a distributed storage of data. And if you take the example of COVID-19 vaccination, instead of maintaining that database at a national level or national registry, ideally, or at least theoretically, it's better to use or store that data at the hospital level or county level, where those who provided the vaccination, they store the data. Now, one of the benefits or potential benefit is that if a data breach happens at one level or one organization, it's not going to affect others because it was just at one instance. Secondly, people are less likely to lose trust in that incidents because it was at a small scale. So you can still find the entity which was accountable for the maintenance of specific data or with regards to the breach. So in short, smaller data leaks are more attributable to who is responsible for this, and it brings in more accountability. And this is particularly relevant in light of this statistics, which is relatively recent statistics published by Edelman Trust Barometer. And the question was about the fears over personal and national data security. And it was a survey carried out in 15 countries, including 2 Arab nations, namely Saudi Arabia and UAE, which are classified under the developing countries chart over here. So you see that people are more concerned about data privacy, about 73% in general, but in developing countries, that percentage is high. And on the other hand, if you ask about them the cyber security or cyber terrorism, cyber attacks, things like that, again, the percentage of people concerned about data issues or privacy issues are more in the developing world compared to the developed world. Moving forward, there was a next slides, please. Yeah, thank you. Next one, please. Thank you. So yesterday there was another instance of a deepfakes, which was covered in the afternoon session about if your family member gets a call from someone who pretends to be you, then there should be a secret word or password to ensure that it's actually you. Now, the concerns regarding the false information or fake news are again higher in developing world compared to the developed world. And same goes for the identification of deepfakes. Again, the developing world is more concerned compared to the developed world. I'm not going to explain these statistics in detail because these are here only to highlight the point or specify the point that what is happening with the specific emerging technologies in different types of countries across the globe. Now, if you look at the aspect of who should manage your data or who should be a watchdog with regards to the trusted part of your data, should it be the government or the technology providers? Again, you see that developing world is more concerned about government regulators. They trust less the government regulators and more the, well, not more actually, but still they have a concern about the government regulators, but they are likely to believe or trust more the private players or the technology providers, because that is what is reflected here. Now, why is that happening? Because majority of the developing world is hopeful about the emerging technologies. They see a hope or trust in emerging technologies as a solution to some of the problems they are facing. And one of the primary concern is access to healthcare. And then there is a list of other solutions which the public sector may offer through the utilization of these specific emerging technologies. And you can see that the hope part or the trust part on emerging technologies in developing world is obviously more than the developed world because of this hope or trust element. Now, here you see a comparison of subsectors in developing world and the developed world in terms of the technologies. The red numbers in red are about the distrust, and numbers in blue are about the trust. So again, the trust is lower in developed world about the emerging technologies, be it for AI robotics or immersive technologies or blockchain or anything. But on the other hand, the developing world is more concerned about the potential solution to their problems. And that's why they trust these technologies or are hopeful about it. So how come this trust element plays a vital role in this trust barometer? So there are two axes. One is the ethical aspect, and the other one is competency aspect. And looking at these two aspects, the ethical part and the competence part, the developing world on top right is again okay. So ethics and competence, they are subcomponents of trust. I'm again repeating these words again and again. So if you look at the developing countries, they are more trusting these technologies because of next slide, please. Because of a potential solution to their problems which exist in the public services, be it about the delivery of a service or corruption or efficiency or effectiveness, anything. Now, when the users were asked about what can increase their trust in new technologies, they highlighted 2 points. One was about the benefits these technologies may offer. Next slide, please. And the other one is about the downsides these technologies may have. So in a way, they are concerned about the risk and reward aspect of these emerging technologies. So next slide, please. So here is a chart about the involvement of foreign governments providing some specific technologies. And if I take the example of one of the yesterday's presentation, where I think Dr. Roxana from Oxford, she mentioned about the migration of Ukraine's data on cloud in just say 2 days. But the case of Ukraine should not be seen as an example for others, because that's a very unique situation. They are trusting the US government, or at the same time, they are trusting the private players, which is the Amazon for cloud service provider, as well as the Starlink for the infrastructure, Starlink for providing this infrastructure. So they are in a unique situation where the government as well as citizens, they both are trusting the service provider in terms of the government, the private player, and the infrastructure provider. But that may not be the case with other countries, and especially the developing countries, where they have a high concern about trusting a foreign government. So that's what is reflected here. The interesting point here on this chart is that the developing world is still hopeful about using technology coming from or sourced from a foreign country than the developed world, because developed world knows what is wrong with with these technologies or what may go wrong. But the developing world again is hopeful or is trusting these technologies to solve their problems. Next slide, please. And reasons for not trusting the foreign tech companies is listed here. Again, I'll skip this part in the interest of time, but you get the indication that different countries divided into developed and developing world, they have a different situation. And that's why your strategy in terms of digital transformation of your public services should be localized. And localized in terms of distinction between, again, the developed countries and the developing countries. And one of the key element is the enthusiastic about the promise, which is the key element in the column of developing countries. So if you move to the next slide, please. Again, here is a 10-year trend. You can see that the developing countries, especially the Saudi Arabia as well as the UAE, they have had increased interest on emerging technologies. UAE, you have data from 2012 to 2022, and you see that in 2012 it was about 81%, and now in 2022 it's about 89%. But on the other hand, for Saudi Arabia, for which they started to collect data from 2019, in 2019 it was around 81%, but during the COVID period it dipped a bit, but now again in 2022 it stands at 83%. So people are trusting, or at least, like I said, it's not only trust, it's also about hope. And hope and trust are going hand in hand in case of developing countries. Next slide, please. So the question is, how can leaders make better and more trustworthy decisions regarding technology? Because we looked at various statistics, we looked at the various cultural part and things like that, but how can decisions be made with that information? Next slide, please. So here is a report coming from the World Economic Forum, which says that the digital trust is individuals' expectations that digital technologies and services and the organizations can provide them, and will protect all stakeholders' interests and uphold societal expectations and values. So if you look at the next slide, we see a digital trust framework, and it's divided into three core areas. One is about the accountability and oversight. The other one is about the inclusive, ethical, and responsible use. And the third one is about the security and resiliency. So all these three elements are further divided into subcategories, which are mostly revolving around the elements of like transparency, fairness, privacy, and safety, and other aspects, which we were discussed in yesterday's presentations. So see, one key difference between this presentation, which I'm covering, and the yesterday's presentation, which happened, is that I'm trying to cover the breadth of trust and the digital electronic emerging technologies. Instead of going deeper on any specific technology or any specific item, I'm trying to give you an overview of what is happening in this domain across the world. Next slide, please. So what we mean by emerging technologies? Next slide, please. Emerging technologies, again, lacks a definition. So there are different definitions coming from academia, consulting organizations, human bodies, and so on. And emerging technologies are just not limited to digital technologies. In some, if you look at the definition coming from OECD or NATO countries and others, they cover technologies like nanotechnology or DNA sequencing and others, as well as several other biotech technologies as part of emerging technologies. But when it comes to ICT or the digital world, we are talking about the more prominent technologies like AI, blockchain, and others. Next slide, please. So if you look at AI, because that is a hot topic these days, and primarily because of the media coverage which ChatGPT has got. So again, there are two aspects of AI. One is, are we trusting the AI? And other one is, can AI offer trust? So the first question is, can we trust the AI, or how can we trust the AI? Here is a framework coming from the Ernst & Young, the consulting firm, and they provide 5 elements, which are, you can say, 5 attributes which can contribute to making AI more trustworthy. One is about the performance, which we all are concerned about. And you might have heard about an incident where ChatGPT generated a completely fake news about a law professor in USA. And it produced a complete article about his involvement into some kind of sexual act or something. So it was completely imaginary and coming out of ChatGPT. So can we trust this kind of news items or news articles generated by AI? No. Now, the other one is about the using utilization of AI for trustworthiness. Again, here is a mapping of different definitions or different attributes coming from various organizations, OECD, European Commission, ITU, and others, where they look at the common attributes which can which AI has to offer for developing trustworthiness in the digital public services. Next slide, please. And here is one example which I have taken to highlight that AI is just not about the negative news, but it's also about the hope and the trust. And it's about the utilization of AI by the Dutch government for inspection of bridges and ducts using drones and AI. So they are not just using AI, but they are integrating it with the geospatial technology or UAV to offer a better a higher safety and security to the citizens. And there are such a good number of cases in the.
Okay, Pankaj, if you can please come to conclusion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Coming to blockchain. Blockchain was rightly said as the trust machine by economists. Next slide, please. And this was because blockchain offers certain unique attributes, and one of them is irreversibility and auditability. So if you look at next slide, you see that can we trust the blockchain? Again, the answer is 50-50. The challenges are if something wrong or inaccurate data or malicious data is added on blockchain. Can you alter that? No. Well, that is going to have a spillover effect on the entire smart contracts which you have designed or deployed on blockchain. Then there are governance issues and security aspects, the 51% attack and things like that. So which may inhibit our trust in blockchain. But still governments across the globe, next slide please, are using blockchain to offer a plethora of services. And this is something coming from the World Bank again, where they have decided to use blockchain or divided over 3 different layers to offer trust in the public services. And the very first layer is social layer, moving on to the data layer, and then third is about the technical layer. Technical part I leave, but like I said, our focus is more on the trust element. So the social layer is something which is going to play a vital role. And on this aspect, governments can provide a culture of trust to the citizens. Next slide, please. The third and the last emerging technology that I have considered is the quantum computing. Again, it's a buzzword. Well, not really a buzzword, but it's emerging technology in true sense, because the governments again are using or exploring the use cases with the quantum computing, and it can play a vital role in three categories. One is about the pharma and the medicine. Second one is about the risk management in complex systems, and third one is about the integration of the same with AI, blockchain, and other existing technologies. Next slide, please. Here is a use case of quantum computing in finance, but I'll skip that in the interest of time. And then the concern is about the post-quantum computing era, because quantum computing can lead to the decryption of encrypted data easily. So for that, they have proposed to use the post-quantum cryptography. But these are the bidirectional flow of information with regards to the trust. Next slide, please. So this is the last part of my slide, and I'm sorry for taking a little more than the time allocated. So one element which has been seen as a solution to most of the trust issues is zero trust. And this is coming from the, again, different entities working for the United Nations and the United States government. And they say that this can be used for addressing the security issues or trust issues in cloud, critical infra, blockchain, AI, and so on. And the problem is, again, there is no standard definition for zero trust, but it has several overlapping and contradicting definitions. And then it's next slide, please. And it's not just technology or product or services, but it offers a philosophical mindset where you do not trust any individual or any machine or any equipment. So everything is unknown and is distrusted in the very first place. Next slide, please. Benefits are that you have a more inclusive and principle-based security or trust mechanism. And the challenges are, next slide, please, that you will have to overhaul the entire process of security architecture in the organization or the government. Next slide, please. So that is all. Thank you. Sorry for rushing in the end, but
Okay. Thank you very much, Pankaj. And yeah, definitely a bit long presentation, but we will have the opportunity to go back to all the interesting information provided in the presentation, because we will also provide a report. A lot of input, so we will have the chance to take our time and go deeper on all these topics. Thank you again. Next speaker will be connecting via Zoom remotely. Do we have? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Robin Wilton.
Good morning.
From the Internet Society, Director for Internet Trust, and welcome to our workshop. Let me introduce you to our audience. Mr. Robin Wilton, champion in internet that prioritizes privacy, security, and trust. He has a 35-year career in the IT industry and brings extensive expertise in system engineering, consultancy, and program management and policy advocacy. Mr. Wilton, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just do an audio check? Are you hearing me okay? Great, thank you. And I will share my screen if I may. There we go. So I hope you're seeing a title slide. Yeah, okay, thanks. Olaf, I can see your arm. It's a useful video signal. Great, thank you. I'm sorry once again not to be able to be there in person, but I'm afraid ill health has prevented me from joining you, much as I would have liked to. I don't have many slides, and you will see a lot of common ground, I think, between mine and those of Pankaj, because what I'm trying to do with these slides is to set out two golden rules for assessing trust in the internet environment. And to do that, I just want to cover briefly 4 topics: some principles and definitions, a look at who the stakeholders are, some implementation factors, and then some trends about where trust in the internet context is going. Well, like Pankaj, I started with a definition of trust, and I think mine may be a little bit less academic than Pankaj's, but it's one that I've been using for some years. And it is to define trust as a belief that someone will act in your interests, even if they have the opportunity and the incentive to do otherwise. And I think you will recognize from some of Pankaj's economics examples that the incentive to do otherwise is very often a commercial one. Now, trust, like any other belief, can be well-founded or ill-founded. And technology may be part of the foundations of trust, but it is very seldom, if ever, the only one. And a physical example of that, if you have a fantastic lock, but you leave the key in the lock or you leave it on the front doormat, the lock is actually useless. And so, again, as Pankaj was setting out, this is not just a matter of technology, it's a matter of human processes as well. Now, I think that the most important question to ask about trust is who or what are you trusting, and what are you trusting them to do? Because trust is always contextual. And to put that in more practical terms, I trust my dentist to drill my teeth. I trust my bank to manage my current account. But those roles are definitely not interchangeable. I don't want a bank manager putting drills in my mouth. Thank you very much. And so we must always complete that sentence, that question, and not just say, oh, I trust the government, but I trust the government to do X. And this idea of vulnerability, or the belief that someone has the opportunity to act against your interests, means that trust is often expected to compensate for an imbalance of power. So the government ultimately has the ability to enforce the law through physical force. And I, as a citizen, may be powerless to stop that. So if I trust the government, it is because I'm doing so in this instance from a position of power imbalance. And that power dynamic is very important when we look at the online world, because very often it's the organizations and entities and functions that the user expected to trust that have more power than the individual. Now, translating this to the online world, everything we do online is mediated through at least one third party. That may be your mobile provider or your internet service provider, or a website hosting organization, or a mail server, or a messaging server. Everything goes through at least one third party. And that creates chains of trust. If one of those parties in the chain is untrustworthy, then the user's faith that others will act in their interest may be ill-founded, may be based on a false assumption. And many of those third parties have different and specific commercial or economic motivations. We see this most commonly in the online environment in the monetization of personal data. That is the economic engine that powers the development and the operation of most online services. And yet, in that context, the individual doesn't have much power. You have to disclose the information that a service provider requests, or you don't get the service. And having disclosed it, you're then at the mercy of that service provider if they decide to monetize your data. So the example I've given here is not about personal data as such, it's about physical safety. Because if you have a car that allows you to, for example, monitor and change the lock status remotely, you will be doing that as a mediated service. In this instance, if I press the lock command on my mobile device to lock the doors of my car, that command will go through a web service, which is probably nominally owned by the vehicle manufacturer, but almost certainly not run by them. So I'm trusting that web service to function reliably and to only process the commands that I send. It would be quite wrong for example, if the vehicle manufacturer was able to lock and unlock my car at their decision. So this brings in a further idea, technically, that these services must be secure from one end to the other, end-to-end security. It should not be possible for a third party to to interfere with or modify the commands that I send to the car, or indeed to submit commands that I didn't initiate. So the elements of trust there are not just about the service being available, they are also about the service being entirely under my control and only doing the things that I intend. The service must express my intentions. Now, transposing that to the public sector environment, one of the characteristics here is that when a citizen interacts with government services, that interaction is usually non-voluntary. I have no option but to interact with the government, for example, to process my taxes. I can't process my taxes by sending a tax return to someone other than the government, and I have to do it. And so there's an inherent power imbalance there, which, as I mentioned earlier, ultimately boils down to the government's right to enforce the law if necessary physically. Now, online, when I'm interacting with the government, many of the intermediaries between me and the government service are still commercial ones, not government entities. And as commercial entities, they have data-driven business models. So we have to bear that in mind when designing public services, that's the full context. The citizen has no option but to deal with you, the government. In doing so, they may have to disclose data to commercial third parties. And if you design the system so that those third parties are able to monetize the systems, the citizens' data, that is almost certainly what will happen because of the strong commercial incentive to do so. So as far as the citizen's trust is concerned, it may be necessary to be able to show the citizen, here are the things in this system design that prevent a commercial intermediary from monetizing your data. Not just does this commercial intermediary allow you to connect to the government service? Do they deliver the service? But what is it in the system that prevents them from misusing that capability? So let's have a look at, very quickly, a few implementation examples, again, from the public sector. If we're looking at a project such as digital identity, what is it in that system that allows the user to control the extent to which they disclose personal data and allows them to control or verify that that data is only being used for the intended purposes? Does the user have selective disclosure of their digital identity attributes? Or to use the physical analog, this is a bad design here, is like proving your age by showing your driving license. If you show someone your driving license, you over-disclose. You disclose far more than is necessary merely to prove your age. So when we transfer to the digital environment, can we correct that? Can we design for selective disclosure so that the user is only disclosing an attribute that is required? Or better still, giving a yes or no answer to a single attribute question, are you over 18? The second one here is the processing of sensitive personal data. And again, this is a core competence of government. It's something that the user, the individual, the citizen has to do via the government under specific circumstances, such as crossing borders or receiving benefits or receiving healthcare and so on. And so the government ends up as a custodian of a great deal of sensitive personal data. In practical terms, how do you maintain the citizen's trust with regard to the prevention and detection of data breaches? And this is not just a matter of locking the data up. because the whole point of having data is you have to use it. And in some circumstances, even as the government, you have to disclose it. But how do you detect if data breaches have happened? Do you have an investigative process that looks for citizens' data in the wild, so to speak, where it should not be? Do you look for evidence of data breaches? Now, one approach I've seen to this is to, the phrase they used was they salted the data. They sprinkled false records in it that didn't correspond to a living citizen. And then the department would look for those records on the internet or in the wild. And if they found those records, that was a strong indication that there had been a data breach, because those records had no other reason to be in the wild. They didn't correspond to a genuine citizen. But including fake records in your database also makes it harder to audit the integrity of the database, because you have to know that those records are fake. And so this is not as simple a design problem as it may appear at first sight. And the third example I want to give is services that cross the boundaries between the public and the private sector. So, for example, if you have a municipal good, such as urban parking spaces, and you decide that it's not really the local government or the municipality's competence to run parking spaces, and so you're going to engage a commercial company to run that parking system for you. So you now have a municipal or public good that is being managed by a commercial entity. They will probably introduce a smart parking system with an app that was developed by a commercial organization, not a public sector one. And they will collect payments, of course, through commercial payment providers, not through the public sector. So all of a sudden, data about my location, my vehicle registration, my travel patterns, my payments is all going through commercial entities in order to benefit from a public or municipal good. And then that interacts with the court system. If I decide not to pay or I get a parking ticket and you take me to court, all of a sudden data is flowing now between the public sector municipal good, commercial service providers, and the legal system and the courts. So this data is not staying neatly siloed. It is jumping from one context to another: commercial, public sector, legal, payment, and so on. And the experience in these domains is clear. All of these things are much easier to do badly than to do well. So the reason this is important, and the trends I just want to look at before I close, is that our societies, our economies, and our lives are now so digital that if the digital elements fail or fail to be trustworthy, more and more is at stake, up to and including, of course, our lives and our physical safety, and that of our homes and families. Now, the technical response to this is security design. And well-designed security technology takes as much human error out of the system as possible. If you design for that, it is a bad idea to compromise that design and expect human processes, human behavior to make up for the difference. But this is what we see some governments doing. We see them saying end-to-end confidentiality and security of communication is all very well, but we want you to change the technology to make law enforcement access to those communications possible. Don't worry, we will make up for the difference with processes and regulations. And I'm sorry to say that is a false promise. If you compromise a well-designed security system by adding in human involvement, you will never get back to the same level of designed-in security. So we should look with extreme caution and skepticism at requests to change security designs and replace security function with human involvement. Because the human, as Pankaj said, is always the weak link in these systems. Simplify the system to make it possible for the human to make the correct decision. But don't oversimplify. These tokens that I've put in the photograph here are all two-factor authentication keys for my laptop. They're very simple to use, but they have nothing on them to indicate which laptop they're for. And so in simplifying the design, the designers have actually introduced another problem. So don't oversimplify. If you expect the user to make a choice, make that choice as easy to make as possible. And that is a design problem or set of problems that are increasingly mature, but still complex to achieve well. So to conclude, I promised you 2 golden rules. The first one is we must always complete the sentence. Trust whom to do what? Not just say, I trust the government, but I am trusting the government to do X. And the second one is this: show me what in this system is giving effect to the individual's preferences. What is it that is protecting their interests? And if you can't show me the thing that is doing that in this system, it's probably not happening. So that was it. I hope I've caught up a little bit of time at least. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions in the remainder of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilton. Last but not least speaker, again, Mr. James Shires is with us. He's a senior research fellow in cybersecurity at Chatham House and author of the book, The Politics of Cybersecurity in the Middle East. James today will speak about cloud infrastructure, data localization, and privacy protecting technologies. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federico, and thank you all for listening to me again, 2 days in a row. So I see this presentation as a relatively narrow example of what Pankaj and Robin have been talking about in terms of trust in digital public services. Pankaj highlighted questions around international commercial relationships, about citizens' trust in foreign technology companies. And Robin talked extensively about the misaligned incentives that companies often have, maybe especially foreign companies, to have citizens' best interests at the center of their design and implementation. The case study I'm going to look at is cloud infrastructure, and I will take a very brief look at cloud investment over the last 6 or 7 years in the Arab region. I'm going to highlight both aspects of competition and cooperation, and these are going to be at both commercial levels, competition between major cloud providers and cooperation between them, and also states, right? Because dynamics of economic competition and cooperation exist between companies and states. Next slide, please. So, of course, cloud is by now, I think, no longer an emerging technology, well and truly emerged. Almost everything we do has some cloud element. So it probably isn't necessary to explain too much about what cloud is here, but if you'll allow me, I'll spend a few minutes just highlighting a few key definitions. So cloud services are, in very simple terms, IT services delivered remotely. They're nearly always spread across multiple physical sites, and nearly always these sites are connected over the internet, not some private connection. The most basic form of cloud service is a provision of infrastructure, such as servers or data storage. But above that, cloud services include a wide range of platforms and applications. So pretty much anything can be in the cloud. Next slide. Cloud services come in a few different forms. The usual way of splitting these up is to talk about private and public clouds. Public clouds are run over the internet They use infrastructure shared with many, many other users, while private clouds are exclusive to a single user. In the extreme case, private clouds run over non-internet networks and can be located in dedicated premises owned by the user or the cloud provider. You then get various in-between states of hybrid cloud, a mix of both public and private cloud systems, and multi-clouds where there's multiple public cloud systems together. So that's worth just highlighting. Next slide, please. Cloud companies generally talk about zones and regions. For some reason, they don't like to talk too much about data centers. They prefer a slightly higher level of abstraction. And although companies differ slightly on their terminology, most of them have regions as roughly corresponding to countries. Microsoft talks about geographies as well. And then zones are standalone data centers or sets of data centers, usually 3, occasionally 2 or 4. The reason companies talk about zones and regions is about mainly redundancy. The idea is that although cloud infrastructure could be connected altogether, if you split it up into different regions and zones, failures in one regional zone won't affect others. And disaster recovery plans, redundancy and resilience requirements mean that this zone and region design is very helpful. There are also other considerations to this zone and region design, including pricing. Frankly, the more zones and regions you want to run your services off, the more expensive it is. How to manage users in different locations. If you have some in one country, some in another country, you might want to combine them all in one zone or region, or deal with their sort of management in separate locations, and latency as well. Right, so the speed of the service depends on how close the actual servers are to those users. So there's a few different considerations there, but this is a language you end up talking about, you end up using if you get into cloud infrastructure in any detail. Next slide, please. Why cloud? Why not cloud? Again, this is a big abstract question. I just highlight a few of the common benefits and risks that are out there in the literature at the moment. The benefits of cloud are lower costs for management and administration, almost none if you can outsource all of it. You have high flexibility and scalability. You can increase business or government services very quickly. You arguably have greater security. We heard this yesterday. Big tech companies and cloud providers have a lot of incentive to attract and the best security talent and make their security levels as high as possible. They also have privileged positions in terms of their view of the threat landscape. And then finally, cloud is absolutely essential. Keep on the previous slide, please. Is absolutely essential for everything that we're talking about in terms of emerging technologies, from the AI applications. These will all run over the cloud. That provides the computing power necessary for most real world applications. In terms of risks, there are significant data protection and privacy risks from data at rest, data leakage. This could be accidental or due to malicious actors. Data in transit. This is why people go to, one of the reasons people go to private, not public clouds. Lack of availability. If you do rely on a cloud provider, they do occasionally fail. And so you do have availability and redundancy concerns. And then finally, you have the obligations of the cloud provider to the state in which they are based, right? And we touched on this in terms of the data protection and cross-border data sharing discussion yesterday, right? If you are, as a citizen of one country, providing data to a company that is headquartered in another country, they have obligations to the law enforcement and security agencies of that country to provide data that may not be the same as those in your jurisdiction. So one of the solutions to these problems is localization, right? So regions and zones are ways of localizing data, although it is cloud data, and it solves some problems and not others. So the overriding principle about thinking about localization is, what are we trying to solve when we advocate for greater localization of data in one particular country, city, or region? This connects to big ideas of sovereignty, which we heard mentioned yesterday, but I'm not going to take it in that direction today. Instead, I thought let's look at some actual data. So next slide, please. These are the main cloud providers from the US, AWS, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Oracle. There is a big difference. AWS has an absolutely mammoth share. There are a couple that are missing out, IBM and Dell, but them and Oracle often work together with the big three. So this is a slightly skewed sample, but it's a representative. If we look at the Arab region, we can see major steps in investment over the last 6 years from having zero infrastructure in the region. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to state that there's obviously one country here that is not in the Arab region, and that is Israel. The reason I've included Israel on these slides is because these companies' investments in Israel are significant. They are also connected to changing geopolitics with the Abraham Accords as well. And these companies see their investments in the broader region as part of a global picture, where they are investing in infrastructure, data centers, cables, and so on with these countries. So what you can see here is, firstly, the fact of investment. These companies are investing in the region. Second, that these companies are investing in only a few countries. They're not the same countries appear as targets for cloud investment for the same companies. So they are all looking at the same locations. And that creates potential risks of inequality and an imbalance in access to cloud infrastructure and services across the region. If we went into this slide in more detail, we'd say, okay, these are country representations of cloud investment. You'd really need to look at the zone and region analysis and different data centers within, for example, in the Emirates, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and so on. Now I'm going to look at a few more dynamics of how this investment happens. So these arrows now represent the time from the announcement of the investment to the actual when the cloud infrastructure becomes operational. Dotted arrows mean that it is still not operational or fully operational. You can already see that there's almost a 2 to 3 time lag between announcement and operationalization. This suggests that it is not a simple thing to invest and build cloud infrastructure, and that there is also variation, right? So some countries and some companies are much quicker to go from announcement to operationalization than others. Potentially, this suggests that the announcement serves its own functions. What goes on with these announcements? So again, this is based on public data, press releases of these companies. Next slide, please. We can see, and I've picked 3 elements of the associated agreements rather than just the establishment of the cloud services. Here, I've picked building skills in the country in which the investment is made. That's the kind of magic book sign. The partnerships with local entities, especially companies, but sometimes government ministries or agencies. That's a handshaking. And then third is the use of these cloud investments for better provision of government services, and that's the building. As you can see, most of these cloud investments include at least one, if not multiple elements of building skills, improving government services, and working in partnership with government or other local entities. Right? So there is a clear demonstration by the cloud companies that this is a purpose they need to communicate publicly, even if they have, as Robin mentioned, more straightforward commercial interests at heart. So next slide, please. Benefits and risks now, thinking about cloud in the Arab region. This is firstly a good thing, right? That the provision of digital government services over cloud can enhance their effectiveness and hopefully their inclusivity. Training and education, again, upskilling everything from graduates to holding to university investments to centers of excellence in certain software, and hopefully also stimulating regulation, right? Some of these countries have specific cloud regulation. Others have developed their data protection, cybersecurity, and telecoms regulation accordingly. And this is, we talked about that yesterday. And then finally, it's worth noting that although the Ukraine example is a very unusual case, this is now being touted as one reason for governments to invest in cloud services, the ability in times of crisis to completely relocate government services. Risks, you have oversupply in a few countries, right? Maybe you don't have true redundancy. If these are small geographic locations with many zones and regions within them, then the question of redundancy seems a little bit overstated. You have big competition between these companies that doesn't necessarily seem to be driving down prices, but is leading to maybe a rush into particular agreements. And then you also have lock into particular services or products, as well as the inequality risks that I mentioned earlier. And finally, before I close, I'll step out a bit because this is a presentation on US cloud companies. One of the trends in global cloud investment is actually the US and especially Chinese cloud companies competing at a regulatory and within a broader trade and technology environment of competition between the US and China. So if we go to the next slide, you can see a similar thing happening. You have Tencent, Alibaba, and Huawei also making some steps into the region. I've included SAP there because some people argue Europe is a similar technology center geopolitically. We can debate that. So it's worth saying to highlight that the US investments should also be analyzed in light of the efforts by these companies to compete with their non-US counterparts. Finally, next slide, and maybe on a slightly more optimistic note, this is clearly an environment of competition, but it's also one where cooperation is certainly necessary. In fact, many of the investments I highlighted, some of them are joint projects by these companies. So you have Amazon and Google working together, Microsoft and Oracle working together for particular bids or projects. They also rely very much on an improved internet infrastructure itself, from the cables and the ISPs, the internet exchanges. This is a central part of the function of cloud infrastructure. We talked about latency earlier. If you have more ISPs and greater cable capacity, you will also have lower latency and ideally lower prices as well. So there are incentives for cooperation as well. And I think I will end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Okay, we are a little bit late, I guess, but maybe perhaps we can make our coffee break a bit shorter and find time for discussion, and we can open the floor for a few questions, Nepal. Yeah, great. Yeah, great. So the floor is open for questions, please.
Yeah, let me break the ice a little bit. I have one remark and one question. The remark is that at the Internet Society we have a mission, and the mission is a secure, trustworthy, open internet for everyone. And that term trustworthy has been chosen with very particular purpose. We don't talk about trust, but we talk about trustworthy, because that's the element of the thing that you're looking at. And so I just want to give that to the audience. If you think about trust, then also think about trustworthiness of the objects that you're trying to impose trust on. Trust might be completely unwarranted. People might trust a bank that is completely fraudulent. Then the bank is untrustworthy, but people still trust the bank. And so trustworthiness was for us the choice of word within our mission statement. And I didn't see it in any of the presentation. And that was sort of an observation that I wanted to share. Question to James. I was writing down the question about infrastructure and the availability of infrastructure, the availability of IXPs, the policy environment to build IXPs, but you addressed that in your last slide. So one aspect of the question remains, and that is you shown a bunch of big cloud companies, and we know of these big cloud companies that they also co-invest in fiber infrastructure. So on that picture that you showed with all the fibers, how much is actually owned? And this is sort of a question about resiliency and redundancy. Do you know how much is owned or co-owned by those cloud providers in this region?
I'm not going to be able to give exact figures, but off the top of my head, in this region, on that last slide, the map of the cables, at the moment, very little, because those cable projects are primarily either originally government funded, they're consortia with previously government-owned telecoms companies that are local, so EAND or Etisalat, whatever you call Etisalat now, and similar ones, as well as major Indian companies as well, like Tata and stuff like that. But that is also changing. So Google has publicly announced several intentions to build new cables, stretching especially around the Gulf region and through the region more broadly. And so that will also change those dynamics. So we definitely see announcements of intentions to move in that direction, as I think maybe there's a 2 to 3 year timeline on establishment of cloud infrastructure. I think the establishment of cables after they are announced is significantly longer.
Yeah, there's more questions actually bubbling. Obviously, cloud services are successful because of scale. You know, big companies attract lots of money, investment, have the capacity to order, to hire staff, and there are big benefits of scale. But are you aware of local initiatives, local companies starting cloud provisioning? Because I see this also in the Netherlands. There are a few small cloud providers within the Netherlands. There are local companies that provide this, and I could imagine regional initiatives becoming successful as well. What's your idea about that?
So there definitely are local companies in the Arab region offering cloud services. Many of them do so through partnership with the big four here. So what I haven't seen very much is completely independent development of cloud provision at a regional level. What's much more likely to happen is either a joint venture or a MOU with a local company. Just to give two examples, and this is not favoritism or anything, in the Emirates, you have G42, which has signed understandings with, I think, all four of the US cloud companies. When I can't remember which one of the cloud companies invested in Saudi Arabia, it was through a joint venture with a subsidiary of Saudi Aramco. So that, and with the Saudi telecoms company STC as well. So there are definitely local players very active in this region, but they're doing so cooperatively rather than as an alternative.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. If you see the presence of cloud companies, most of them, they are present in Asia. They're not much in Africa. So building a national data center that is to use for the local hosting, what are the consequences of building a national data center or using the cloud? The differences between those two approaches. What do you think? If the government is building a national data center, or it's better to use those vendors for international cloud companies? Thank you.
Yes, James, you want to answer that?
Of course.
Okay.
There are several considerations in terms of government-owned infrastructure as opposed to government-run or cloud-supplied infrastructure. Some of these are cost, and frankly, these are commercial decisions based by the company. So the companies I mentioned are not investing in the region for the good of the citizens, right? They're not investing in the region for the good of the government services or the level of government services. They're investing because they think it is a profitable commercial activity. So in terms of that rationale, that if you look at certain states in Africa, you would have to have that kind of rationale for the companies to invest. But there are also non-economic considerations as well. And this is where I go back to the first slide on private and hybrid cloud infrastructure. Even if you engage a big cloud provider, it's not necessarily appropriate for some government services to be run on public cloud. You will want a hybrid or private model instead. And then the more private it gets, the closer you get to a direct analogy with simply government-owned infrastructure. So it's a bit of a spectrum from completely public to completely private. And the more requirements you introduce on a cloud provider to say lockdown or secure or not, or don't share data beyond certain places, the more a traditionally government-run infrastructure seems to be an equal, if not better, alternative. I hope that helps.
Federico, I have a question.
Thank you, James.
I have a question.
Rami.
Yes, hi, good morning. This question is for any one of the panelists. So what strategies or policy changes could governments adopt in our region to build and maintain the trust among citizens in this digital age, considering the rapid pace of adoption of emerging technologies?
Policies to adopt. Anyone volunteers to answer? Pankaj?
Yeah, I can try to answer this question. See, one of the key element of GovTech initiative of World Bank and the others which I mentioned in my presentation is the involvement of citizens engagement. And this was also reflected in the survey of a trust barometer, where citizens said that they should be informed about the benefits as well as the challenges which a potential technology may have if it's implemented by the governments. So in a way, it's about engaging them and making them aware of what are the pitfalls, or making them aware about the benefits and the risk which a technology offers. So that's the one way, and I think that's the only way to build a trust in both the ways. Citizens having trust on the government, and the governments having trust on the citizens. If I give you one example, it's just a random example, again, not in favor or against anyone. Yesterday, I was browsing my Twitter account, and I saw someone sharing his tax statement from Australia. And the individual mentioned that, see, here's a breakdown of our tax which I paid, and the utilization of those funds by the government on specific items, how much money was spent on healthcare, how much on education, and so on. So this was shared in a good faith. But people had comments that, oh, well, if the government wants to cheat, they can cheat anyway. So how do you verify this, that this was actually invested on the healthcare or education and so on? So it's about making a trust on both the sides. And though the government made an effort of providing information on distribution of the investment or the spending they did with the taxes collected, but the citizens were still concerned about, or they had distrust on the government because they cannot verify it. And that's where technologies like blockchain or AI something, they can offer some kind of mechanism depending upon how they utilize it and what the specific regulatory and governance framework is. That's the way I think governments can offer this here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. Great. Okay.
It's another way. He says, أود سؤالك حول كابل الاتصالات AAP1. Would like to ask about the cable AAP1. So it is specified to whom this question is addressed from the cloud.
I'm sorry, the audio from the room is a little bit faint. Is this about the question in the chat about the?
Yeah, Mr. Rabi, you were not able to hear the question?
No, but I think I gathered it from the chat. So I'm not the best person to answer this, but I can give you at least a very high level answer, which is about this is about the ownership of the cable. Is that right? And who? Yep. So this is ultimately this is a consortium project. So it's the AAE1 cable that essentially links China, Southeast Asia, and through Egypt, and then on to even some European countries. It was initiated, I believe, as a joint venture between China and Telecom Egypt, but obviously, given the number of countries and regions through which it passes, it has ended up being a consortium event. So, like I say, I'm not really the authority on that, but that's the context. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Next question, please.
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions from the room?
May I suggest, good morning, everyone, and thank you
Yes.
for the valuable contribution. Maybe one small recommendation from each speaker, it will be helpful, for the end of the session.
Yes, that would be I think, a perfect feedback for me. So if most of the participants can provide me some kind of feedback on the presentation that I had, especially on the trust aspect, so that can be covered in the report as well. Yeah. Olaf already provided one on the trustworthiness. So I had a comment on that because I had that covered in my slide. See, I fully agree with your point. And the only distinction is that trust is like a belief. and trustworthiness is behavior. So I was approaching this from more sociological perspective rather than the technology perspective, and that's why I focus more on the trust element. But your point is well taken. Thank you.
My recommendation would, I guess, it is kind of to governments, but also to companies as well, because the first point would be to broaden out access to infrastructure. That I think is the main implication of the presentation I showed. And so, however we, you governments and companies are able to increase access and the diversity of cloud infrastructure in the region, that would be beneficial for everyone. More specifically, the developments on non-commercial aspects of these agreements, of these investments, things like training, skills, provision for particular government services are really important. And it's vital that those are not just good PR or headline announcements, but are actually delivered in practice.
Okay, thank you very much to our speakers. I think we have.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Oh yes, Robin, yes.
So I'm going to come back on this trust and trustworthiness thing, because I think that's the right way to look at it. The golden rule I suggested was show me what it is in the system that is acting in the user's interest, and the answer to that will usually be it's either it's the law, or it's the contract that we, the government, have with this commercial cloud service provider, or it's the people in process that we have in place, or it's you can trust this system because the minister is accountable for it and the minister is a good person. So there you can see the full range, and this is why Pankaj is right. This is a multi-stakeholder problem. None of those stakeholders on their own can deliver all of those factors. So get the stakeholders in the same room and show them that you are representing their interests.
Great. So thank you very much. If there's no more questions from the room, I think we can conclude the session here. I thank again our speakers, Pankaj, Mr. Robert Walton, and James Shires. And we can have a coffee break now. And thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.